The restaurant fell silent the moment she left. The powerful CEO, Charlotte Hale, leaned back in her chair, eyes glinting with disbelief. "You're a single dad?" she scoffed, not knowing the man across from her would one day drag her out of a sinking car and restart the very heartbeat she almost lost. If stories like this remind you that kindness can come from the most unexpected places, stay with us, because what happens next might just change how you see love, second chances, and what it really means to save someone's life. The cafe on Mission Street was the kind of place designed for comfort. Brick walls, amber lighting, and the faint hum of jazz from an old speaker in the corner. On a quiet Saturday afternoon, Charlotte Hale sat by the window, her reflection mirrored in the glass alongside the blur of passing cars. She checked her watch again, irritation simmering beneath the surface. She was a CEO, after all. Time was currency, and she rarely spent it on strangers. When the bell above the cafe door jingled, she glanced up. A man stepped inside, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a worn leather jacket. His hands were calloused, smudged faintly with grease, and his eyes carried a softness that didn't belong to the city's rhythm. He paused, scanning the room, before walking toward her with a hesitant smile. "Charlotte?" he asked. For a brief second, she assumed he must be staff or a delivery driver. "Oh no, that's not—" she began, then stopped cold as he extended a hand. "Evan Brooks, from the app." The realization hit like a misplaced beat. Her blind date, the one her best friend had begged her to go on. He's a single dad, really kind, down to earth. Down to earth, apparently, meant oil stains and a cheap watch. She blinked, forcing a polite smile. "Right, Evan. Sorry, I just wasn't expecting—" "A guy like me?" he offered, an easy grin softening the sting. "No, She faltered, then sighed. "Yes, a little." He chuckled, not unkindly. "Well, that makes two of us. I was told you like strong coffee and honest people. I can handle one of those." His humor disarmed her, if only for a second. Still, Charlotte couldn't help noticing the faint tear near his jacket cuff, the scuffed boots, the way he stirred his coffee without sugar, as though saving it for someone else. He talked about his daughter, Mia, 7 years old, obsessed with dragons and peanut butter sandwiches. His voice softened when he mentioned her, the corners of his mouth lifting like sunlight breaking through rain. "She's the reason I know every cartoon theme song on Earth," he said with a laugh. Charlotte smiled politely, but glanced at her phone more than once. She was used to boardrooms, not bedtime stories. "You were a firefighter?" she asked, reading between his simple sentences. He nodded. "Was, until the shoulder injury. Now I fix the trucks I used to ride in." "Oh," she said, her tone slipping toward pity before she could stop it. "That must be different." "Different's one way to put it," he said, still smiling. "But I still get to keep people safe, even if it's just making sure the brakes work." She looked away, embarrassed by her own tone. To fill the silence, she mentioned her company, Hale Biotech, and its new medical project. He listened carefully, genuinely, but she could tell he didn't fully follow the jargon, and that made her defensive. "It's complicated," she said briskly. "You'd need a PhD to understand the engineering." "Or a good wrench," he teased lightly. She froze, unsure if it was a joke or a jab. He sipped his coffee calmly, as if he'd said nothing wrong. When the check arrived, Charlotte reached for her card. He placed a folded 20 on the tray first. "You can get the next one," he said. She laughed, surprised by the confidence. "You think there'll be a next one?" "I like to be optimistic," he replied, but the warmth in his tone wasn't returned. She rose, smoothing her tailored coat. "I actually have an emergency meeting," she lied, voice low. "Of course," he said simply, standing as well. "Thanks for your time, Charlotte." Something flickered in his eyes, not hurt, just quiet acceptance. She hesitated, guilt tugging faintly, then turned to leave. Her coffee cup tipped slightly, a brown ring staining the napkin beneath it. She muttered an apology and left in a rush. Evan sat back down after she was gone. For a moment, he just stared at the napkin with its faint imprint of her lipstick and the coffee stain shaped almost like a heart. With a small smile, he folded it carefully and tucked it into his jacket pocket. Outside, the sky was turning a deeper gray. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and something else, something unspoken. He didn't know it yet, but that same woman who had laughed at him today would one day owe him her life. And when that day came, it wouldn't be pride or chance that brought him to her. It would be instinct, the same kind that made him run toward the fire when everyone else ran away. Morning sunlight spilled across the cracked tiles of Evan Brooks's kitchen, glinting off a line of mismatched mugs. The smell of toast and cheap coffee filled the air. 7-year-old Mia sat at the table, swinging her legs, a crayon tucked behind one ear. "Daddy, you're burning the toast again," she announced solemnly, without looking up from her drawing. "It's called flavor," Evan said, flipping the slice with a grin. She giggled, and the sound softened the ache that had been living quietly in his chest since the day his wife, Claire, died. Those small moments, her laughter, her trust, were what kept him anchored. After breakfast, he walked her to school, her tiny hand clutching his with absolute faith. Then he drove to the auto bay near the fire station where he used to work, the air thick with the scent of oil and metal. His days were long but steady, spent repairing the same rescue trucks he once rode into danger. There was comfort in the routine, though sometimes when the engines roared back to life, he felt the hollow echo of what he'd lost. The memory of the blind date from last weekend slipped into his thoughts like static. Charlotte Hale, the woman who had looked at him like he was an accidental entry on her calendar. He wasn't angry, he'd been judged before, but something about her eyes, sharp yet deeply tired, had stayed with him. She reminded him of people who'd seen too much fire and forgot how to step out of the smoke. Miles away, in a high-rise glass office overlooking the San Francisco Bay, Charlotte was living inside that smoke. The walls of Hale Biotech gleamed with innovation and pressure. Her assistant trailed her through the hall with 2 phones and a tablet, rattling off numbers about investors and product deadlines. "We can't delay the clinical trial, Charlotte," the board reminded her every hour. "You're the face of this company." She nodded, her jaw tight, her heart heavy. For months, she had been leading a groundbreaking project on artificial heart valves designed to save lives faster than traditional surgery. A legacy she'd dreamed of since losing her own father to heart failure. But lately, the lines between ambition and exhaustion had blurred. The same steel resolve that built her empire now left her hollow. Her recent divorce had turned into tabloid fodder, and every smile felt rehearsed. That night, alone in her penthouse, she poured herself a glass of wine and scrolled through the news. A headline caught her eye. "Former firefighter honors anniversary of Mission Street rescue." The photo made her freeze. It was him, Evan Brooks, standing beside a fire truck, holding a small plaque, his left shoulder bandaged. The article told of a warehouse explosion years ago, where he had carried out 12 survivors despite his own injury. One of those survivors, a child, had grown up to join the department in his honor. Charlotte felt her stomach twist. The man she'd brushed off as ordinary had once run into flames to save strangers. Shame crept up her throat. She'd spent years perfecting empathy in medical presentations, yet failed to show any to a man sitting across a coffee table. Without overthinking, she opened her phone and found his number from the dating app. Her message was short. "I read about what you did. I'm sorry for how I treated you." She didn't expect a reply, but one came minutes later. "It's okay. We all fight our fires differently." The words sat heavy in her chest. She read them over and over, realizing that kindness didn't need polish. It just needed truth. In the following days, her thoughts drifted to him more often than she wanted to admit. She wondered what kind of father he was, what bedtime stories he told his daughter, What made him laugh when no one was watching? For the first time in years, her perfect world felt strangely incomplete. Across town, Evan tucked Mia into bed after reading The Little Engine That Could for what felt like the 100th time. "Daddy," she murmured sleepily, "do you ever get lonely?" The question caught him off guard. "Sometimes," he admitted softly, "but then I think about how lucky I am to have you." She smiled drowsily, her eyelids fluttering shut. He watched her breathe, steady and safe, and whispered a silent prayer of gratitude. Yet later, as he sat by the window with that folded napkin still tucked in his wallet, he couldn't help but wonder what Charlotte Hale saw when she looked at him, if she ever thought of him at all. What neither of them knew was that fate was already moving its quiet pieces. A storm was coming, one that would tear through metal, glass, and pride. And when it hit, the woman who had once laughed at him would find herself clinging to the very man she'd dismissed, not for his charm or his wit, but for his courage, and the heart that never stopped saving others, even when his own was still healing. The storm rolled in without warning. By late afternoon, the sky above San Francisco had turned the color of wet steel, and wind battered against the glass walls of Hale Biotech. Charlotte stood at her office window, staring out at the roiling clouds over the bay. She'd just finished a tense meeting with her board, a string of sharp voices arguing over deadlines, data, and profits. Her pulse thudded in her ears, a rhythm she couldn't seem to calm. Her assistant had begged her to stay until the storm passed, but Charlotte hated waiting. "It's just rain," she said, gathering her laptop and keys. "I'll be fine." She wasn't fine. Outside, sheets of rain sliced across the parking lot, turning it into a mirror of rippling reflections. She climbed into her sleek black sedan, turned on the wipers, and merged onto the narrow coastal highway that curved along the bay toward the airport. She needed distance from the company, from the noise, from the ghost of the man she couldn't stop thinking about. The rhythmic swish of the wipers was the only sound until a flash of lightning split the horizon. Thunder followed, low and rolling. The rain thickened, blurring the world into a gray smear. Charlotte slowed down, leaning forward to see, her heartbeat syncing with the erratic pulse of the storm. Then, hydroplane. The tires lost grip, skidding violently. The steering wheel jerked from her hands. The car spun across the slick pavement, slammed through a guardrail, and dropped nose first down a muddy embankment. The sound of metal crunching drowned out her scream. Then silence, broken only by the relentless hiss of rain. She tried to move, but pain shot through her shoulder. Her phone had flown somewhere into the dark. She fumbled for it, finally finding it wedged beneath the seat. Screen cracked, but glowing faintly. "1 bar of service." She dialed 911, her voice shaking. "Car, off Highway 37, by the bay," she managed before the line cut to static. The battery icon flashed red. Panic clawed at her chest as water began seeping through the door seals. "No," she whispered, pressing against the glass. But the door wouldn't budge. 10 miles away, Evan Brooks was driving home with Mia asleep in the back seat, her head tilted against her stuffed dragon. The radio crackled with emergency reports of downed power lines. He reached to turn it off, then froze. A faint emergency signal blipped through the static. A distress code familiar from his firefighting days. Vehicle submerged, female occupant, Beirut. His instincts kicked in before logic could catch up. He glanced at his daughter in the rearview mirror. "Hang tight, sweetheart," he murmured, pulling into a gas station parking lot. The rain drummed harder as he called an old colleague from the firehouse. "Got a 1050 down by the bay. I'm close." "You're off duty, Brooks," came the reply. "Let the rescue unit handle it." But Evan was already pulling his jacket tighter. They'll be too late. He left Mia in the truck, locking the doors and turning on the cabin light. "Daddy's got to help someone. Keep your dragon brave for me, okay?" She nodded sleepily, trusting him with the unshakable certainty only children have. Then he ran into the storm. The highway was chaos, wind howling, water pooling over the asphalt. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness until it glinted off twisted metal halfway down the embankment. He slid down the slope, boots sinking in mud, rain lashing his face. The car's front end was half submerged, the engine steaming. He shouted, "Ma'am, can you hear me?" A faint cry answered, muffled by glass. When he reached the door and saw her face through the window, time stilled. Charlotte Hale. Her eyes widened in disbelief before fear overtook her. "Evan?" she gasped. "It's okay," he said, bracing himself. "I've got you." He yanked at the handle, locked. Water was climbing higher, swirling around her waist. Without hesitation, he grabbed his rescue hammer from the tool belt he still carried in his truck and smashed the side window. Glass shattered, water rushed in. "Take my hand," he shouted. She hesitated, trembling. But he caught her wrist and pulled her free just as the car's battery shorted with a burst of sparks. They stumbled through the mud together, the car hissing behind them as the headlights flickered out. Charlotte collapsed on the roadside, coughing, soaked and shaking. Evan crouched beside her, breathless but steady. "You're safe," he said softly, checking her pulse out of old habit. "That's all that matters." She stared at him through tears, rain mixing with disbelief. You came back for me." He smiled faintly, shoulder bleeding where glass had cut him. "Guess I saved another stubborn heart." She wanted to speak, to apologize, to tell him everything she'd never said that night in the cafe. But the words wouldn't come. The storm raged around them, sirens now echoing in the distance. As paramedics arrived, she reached out and gripped his hand tightly. He tried to pull away, but she held on. "Don't go," she whispered. His expression softened. "I'm not going anywhere." Later, as they loaded her into the ambulance, Charlotte's gaze followed him, soaked, limping, his shirt clinging to his back. The man she had once dismissed had just risked his life without hesitation. Somewhere deep inside, something began to shift. Not just gratitude, but recognition. For the first time in years, she felt her heart beating for something real. The hospital room smelled faintly of antiseptic and rain-soaked earth. Evan sat on the edge of the bed, his shoulder bandaged, his arm resting in a sling. He'd been released from observation that morning, but hadn't gone home. Instead, he found himself back in the same ward, standing by the door of room 312, Charlotte Hale's room. Through the window, she looked impossibly fragile beneath layers of white sheets, the storm still lingering in her eyes. When she turned her head and saw him, her expression softened into something he hadn't seen before, something vulnerable. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "You're injured." "You shouldn't have been on that road," he countered gently, stepping inside. "Guess we both have a stubborn streak." That earned a faint smile. It was the first time he'd seen her smile without armor. He placed a paper cup of coffee on her nightstand. Hospital brew, still better than what they served at that cafe. She laughed, the sound brittle but real. "I remember." Her gaze dropped to his shoulder. "You could have died out there." He shrugged, his voice low. "I've seen worse storms." For a moment, silence hung between them, comfortable for once. Then a soft knock interrupted it. Mia peeked in, holding a folded piece of paper colored in uneven shades of blue and red. "Daddy, can I show her?" she asked. Evan nodded. The little girl walked shyly to Charlotte's bedside and handed over her drawing. It showed a stick figure in a raincoat pulling another from a car, surrounded by swirls of lightning. At the bottom, written in uneven letters, "Daddy saving the lady in the storm." Charlotte's throat tightened. "You drew this for me?" Mia nodded solemnly. "He never gives up on people, even when they don't believe in him." Charlotte blinked back tears. The words hit deeper than she expected, unlocking memories she'd buried. The long nights after her divorce, the loneliness behind glass walls, the guilt of pushing people away. She reached out and gently touched Mia's hair. "You're very brave," she said softly. The girl smiled, proud, then skipped over to the corner chair to read her picture book, leaving the adults in a hush of understanding. Over the next few weeks, healing blurred into habit. Charlotte's injuries were minor, but she kept finding excuses to see Evan, dropping off thank-you meals, helping him with follow-up appointments, visiting his workshop to see how his shoulder was healing. The garage smelled of oil and warmth, with sunlight pooling on the concrete floor. She watched him teach Mia how to tighten a bolt, his patience infinite. There was something grounding about it. The simplicity, the laughter, the way he looked at life as though it were made of small, sacred moments. She started staying longer, sometimes helping Mia with homework while Evan cooked dinner. The three of them fit together in quiet, unspoken ways. One evening, as twilight settled, Evan pulled a small envelope from his jacket. Inside was the old napkin from their first date, the one she'd left behind. The coffee stain had faded, pressed flat between pages of a worn notebook. "You kept this?" she asked, voice trembling. "Yeah," he said, eyes steady. "I figured everyone deserves a second chance to be seen differently." Charlotte stared at the napkin for a long time. Then, for the first time, she told him about her father's heart condition, the night she'd promised to build something that could save others. "But somewhere along the way, I forgot why I started," she admitted. "It became about shareholders, not hearts." Evan listened without interrupting, his gaze kind but unwavering. "You can always start again," he said simply. "Broken things still hold together if you care enough to fix them." Later that night, as she helped Mia pack her school bag, Charlotte suddenly felt dizzy. Her heartbeat stuttered, uneven and sharp. She grabbed the table for balance. Evan caught her just in time, his instincts snapping into focus. He pressed 2 fingers to her wrist, counting silently. "Your rhythm's off," he said, concerned. "It's arrhythmia." "I'm fine," she insisted weakly, but he shook his head. "No, you're not." He remembered the same fluttering pulse in his late wife's hand before her diagnosis. Without hesitation, he drove Charlotte to the hospital. The doctors confirmed it. A mild but dangerous irregular heartbeat, likely stress-induced. Irony struck her like lightning when the cardiologist suggested she undergo a test trial for the very artificial valve her company had developed. "You built this," Evan reminded her softly as she lay in recovery later. "Now it's saving you." She smiled faintly through the oxygen mask. Maybe it was never just about saving others. He took her hand, the steady weight of it grounding her. Maybe it was about saving yourself, too. In the days that followed, Charlotte's health stabilized. She stepped back from work for the first time in years, spending her afternoons at Evan's garage, reading while Mia tinkered beside her. Life felt smaller but infinitely fuller. The CEO who once measured her worth in headlines now found peace in the sound of a child's laughter and the quiet hum of an engine being mended. A year later, San Francisco looked different. Not because the skyline had changed, but because Charlotte saw it through new eyes. The city that once shimmered with pressure and ambition now pulsed with something gentler. Gratitude. The morning sun spilled gold across the waterfront, where a small crowd gathered before a newly renovated brick building with a modest sign that read Heartline Foundation. Reporters stood with cameras ready, but the atmosphere was less corporate launch and more community gathering. Children chased bubbles near the fountain. Volunteers handed out coffee and muffins. And at the center of it all stood Evan Brooks, looking slightly uncomfortable in a clean suit that didn't quite hide the calluses on his hands. Beside him, Charlotte adjusted the microphone with her usual poise, but her smile was softer, freer than anyone remembered from her CEO days. Heartline was built on a simple belief, she began, her voice steady but warm, that no heart, mechanical or human, should be left behind. The crowd listened, rapt. This foundation began because one act of courage reminded me what real purpose looks like. She turned slightly toward Evan. A year ago, I was the one being rescued. Today, I want to live my life rescuing others, together. Applause rose and Evan's ears turned red under the sunlight. After the speeches, children gathered around a small stage where Mia stood. Her hair in pigtails and her shoes slightly mismatched. Charlotte knelt beside her, adjusting the mic. "Are you ready, sweetheart?" "Yes," Mia whispered, gripping the paper she'd been practicing with all week. Her voice carried clearly, innocent and pure. "My daddy says saving someone's heart is the bravest thing you can do. But I think sometimes it's letting people in that's even braver." The audience went silent for a moment before bursting into applause. Charlotte felt her throat tighten as she reached for Evan's hand. He gave it a gentle squeeze, his thumb brushing across her knuckles like a promise. Later, as the crowd thinned, Evan found her by the pier behind the building, where the bay stretched wide and endless. The wind tugged at her hair, carrying the scent of salt and new beginnings. "You handled that speech like a pro," he said. "Old habits die hard," she smiled, turning toward him. "You still get nervous in suits?" "Every single time." They laughed softly, the sound blending with the waves. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Charlotte reached into her purse and pulled out the old napkin, now laminated, the faint coffee stain still shaped like a heart. "I kept it," she said quietly. "Reminds me how pride almost cost me something irreplaceable." He took it from her, his thumb tracing the edge. "And now? Now it reminds me that sometimes life gives you a second chance you didn't earn, but you try to be worthy of it anyway." His gaze lingered on her, tender but searching. "You've more than earned it, Charlotte." "Maybe," she said softly, "but I think we earned it together." As the afternoon faded into gold, they walked back inside to finish cleanup. Evan's crew was packing boxes of donated medical equipment bound for rural hospitals. Charlotte stopped to help, sleeves rolled up, laughing when grease smeared her wrist. "Careful," he teased. "You're going to ruin that manicure." "I don't do boardrooms anymore," she said, smiling. "I do bandages now." He chuckled, admiring how easily she fit into the rhythm of his world, how the woman who once measured success in numbers now measured it in heartbeats. That evening, when the last guest had left, they stood with Mia on the dock outside the foundation. The water shimmered beneath the orange glow of sunset. Mia handed each of them a small folded paper heart, cut from the same napkin design she'd traced. "We have to let the old storms go," she declared solemnly. Together, they set the hearts adrift on the water. The tide carried them gently away, reflections trembling like tiny lanterns. Charlotte leaned against Evan's shoulder, her head fitting perfectly beneath his chin. "It's strange," she murmured. "I used to think love was supposed to be perfect, planned, polished, predictable, but maybe it's just showing up for someone, over and over, even when it's hard. That's the only kind worth having," he said. "Messy, real, and a little stubborn." She laughed softly. "Like us?" "Exactly like us." Mia's voice interrupted them. "Can we go home now?" Charlotte smiled, glancing up at Evan. "Home," she repeated, as if testing the word for the first time. He nodded. "Yeah, let's go home." They walked down the pier hand in hand, the little girl skipping ahead, her laughter echoing across the water. Behind them, the sign for Heartline glowed faintly under the fading sun. The foundation would go on to change thousands of lives. But for the three people walking away from the light, the most important life it had saved was their own. And as the first evening stars appeared, Charlotte whispered more to herself than anyone else, "Sometimes, the heart you once laughed at is the one that saves you. Sometimes the heart you laugh at becomes the one that saves you. Charlotte learned that love doesn't always arrive in designer shoes. It can come covered in grease and courage, carrying a little girl's drawing and a quiet kind of strength. And maybe that's what real healing is. Not grand gestures, but choosing to stay, to care, to begin again. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who still believes in second chances. And remember to subscribe for more soul-stirring tales that remind us kindness still changes everything.